Hello, and welcome to an hour with Scott Perry Johnson, the abandoned poet. Full life story, uncensored. A lot of people have often asked me, why did I turn out the way I did? How did I end up from being that shy, quiet little boy? A little energetic and overactive? Sure. But what person with ASD is not? To being an angry person, trying to figure out how to channel their frustrations. How did I turn out to become the abandoned poet? It starts from my childhood until my now almost 31 in a few days. As a child, at 5 years old, I was pretty much used for my abilities. Since YouTube wasn't released until 2005, there is almost no evidence of my careers as a 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old horse rider and singer. As I rolled down show, eyes were all over me. One kid, at 5 years old, on a horse after dressage and show jumping. Count them, thousands, and invited back every year, and every day, 4 days every year. And stage after stage, down entertainment center twice. We got bush festivals, team band on the mission. Let's see, we got hotels, great halls, assemblies, schools, even when I was in school. Well, before all that came, unbeknown to me, I didn't know that a family was supposed to be different to the one I grew up in. But it started off relatively well at that age. However, I didn't understand my mother being separated from my father. As I got older, around age 8 years old, family violence and dysfunction ran rampant on a daily basis. Police called, breakdowns, mostly me. Threats of all kinds, and this lasted for years. Bashings on a daily basis. Last year, I recently pulled a confession out of my brother on the phone. That because I was a younger and more attractive brother. By 2 years. And that he saw me on stage a lot was the reason he beat me almost daily, to the fear that my jaw would break and my mother would do nothing to stop it. Every day was basically wasted on me because I was always in the public eye. I was always entertaining and not being paid 1 red cent. Except for when I was 14 and the Mayor of Darwin, Katrina Fong Lim, paid me to sing at the Crown Plaza Hotel, now called the Hilton, in Darwin, on Mitchell Street, I believe. Now, all that aside, the violence was absolutely incredible and extraordinary. The highly violent family dysfunction actually forced me out onto the streets. It was a violent neighborhood, a ghetto kind of neighborhood. And, well, what can I say? I went for walks a lot. I had a dog when I was 10 and I went for walks, but by age 8 years old, my sister's 7, 4 years older than me. On the weekends, we're both brutally molested by our father. I didn't speak up until high school. My sister was compensated, 50,000. I got nothing. Not that I care about money. I don't even get into this for the money. Just to spread awareness, really. As people know, I fight against abuse, violence, cruelty, corruption, discrimination, sexual slavery, pedophilia, terrorism, and much more. In my earlier days, I was content on stage, and horse riding, dressage, show jumping, and but I was always afraid of going home. Always. That's why I stood still on stage most of the time, with thousands of eyes looking at me on horseback. Well, they treated me pretty well there. I got free ride passes. I was just a little kid and I was happy as hell. And, well, my classmates, I didn't even know I was famous at the time, but famous fleeting, as they say. So, moving into that, when I went out, I was forced into prostitution, overlapping with when my solo career, unpaid of course, they took advantage of my talents for years, came to an end when somebody left town who arranged everything behind the scenes. So being forced into prostitution at 13, still singing for an extra year. Well, later on, a connection kidnapped me. I was taken by force and put into a car. I don't know where I was in the end. I really don't. The last thing I remember in my memories was being chained to a wall. And someone else there. I remember being tortured. I remember a tool being sliced down my back. I still have that scar on my back to this day. I remember the beatings. I remember what happened. Kind of. But this was years ago when I was a teenager. After that, I made a career out of escort work, or as some may call it, prostitution. I prefer to use a professional term. Well, I used to go around putting ads in the paper, and people would call me. I was very busy and ran off my feet quite a lot. Between 1 to 2 to sometimes 5 clients per day. I've been in every single hotel in Darwin City. I really have. Believe me, I think I've filled up just about every single room in one of them. Strangely, 3 on the same day when someone was staying there. In the same hotel. Well, anyway. With a high violent dysfunctional family, I desperately wanted to escape. I had to choose between that and drinking and a loving home and family. Yes, when I was 8 years old, my sister and I were forced into drinking and smoking. She was 7, 4 years difference. To this day, I still drink more than my body weight in cask wine. What could I do? I had to find a way to cope, and I know it's going to kill me. Which is why I'm so ambitious about my career goals. During these times, I was used, raped, molested, mistreated, and had to live with some sex offenders here and there, against my will. I've had bowls thrown at me. I've been punched to the ground. Even a corrupt ex-cop who didn't get away with it, and my face covered in blood. My life has pretty much been one violent incident after the other. So behind the glitz and the glamour of the Royal Darwin Showgrounds, where everything started, led to a very dark home life. It led to despair, really, and taught me passive behavior beyond all belief. Later on after that, when I turned 18, The police were jumping all over me. My mother noticed that. She said this years before she died. And these were self-defense cases. I won all of them, acquitted, and I had hanging over my head for years all this stuff. And one was a draw with that horrible, 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 horrible ex-police officer I mentioned. To this day, I cannot stand Gawkers because at a park where it happened, as the sun was rising, all they did was stand back and gawk at me. Joggers, dumbasses like that. While I was pleading for help, this man had no right to grab me. He had no right to rub my face all over the ground. All I was trying to do was help a woman up who was sitting on the footpath. And he ran past that woman. I said to him, "Hey, you're not going to help?" This woman seemed to be depressed and enlightened. She was Aborigine. I don't know if it was a sitting kind of thing, but well, she seemed lovely. But he was not. So he took a bowl off the table and threw it in the bin. It was a special one given as a gift from a friend. And I went to grab it from him, and he tried to call it assault. No, I'm not known for assault. I'm known for peace. That's just who I am. And this was when I was with I was 16, he was 29. Back then it wasn't legal, but who cares? It's legal now. We still keep in touch occasionally. Well, after all these cases, I decided to flee Darwin. I had finally beaten everything. I no longer had to live with horrible reprobates, pedos, and sex offenders. I finally used everything I had left and ended up in Sydney. Now, in Sydney, I had very little to go. Very little to go with, I mean. And I was basically homeless. If it weren't for a dear friend in the past, who actually didn't know I was underage, but he thought I was overage, he just like looked very young. That kind of scared him. Well, we've been friends since for years. No names. Yeah, I wasn't affected, I knew what I was doing. He and his mother, who he has actually met my family, put me up in hotel after hotel after hotel. Eventually, I paid them back one day from my mother's inheritance. More than paid them back, actually. I gave many thousands to people who really deserved it, and he definitely did. Well, ending my escort career at age 22. And after working in a place near Oxford Street, I didn't get paid 1 red cent there either. I mean, in a Chinese motel, how's saying, do it this way, educating anyone? It's not. So, this leads us to my unofficial foster father. He waited around all day and met me in Sydney. I was working, again, not paid. And eventually, I was at the end of everything. After all the suicide attempts, after trying to hang myself, after all the beatings, after years of escort work, after highly violent family, trauma, dysfunctional trauma, I mean. I was finally ready to start a new life. I gave it up. I caught a train to the Blue Mountains. When I caught a train to the Blue Mountains, I lived with him in a half-built cottage at the bottom of a hill on a property. Something I put in a fictional story in the first edition the Jackal's friend. Now, things went pretty well for a while. Financially drained a little. And he agreed to move only around the corner to and across the road to another place, in a place called Lawson. So one end of Lawson to the other. We did that. I was still struggling with these horrible, horrible, horrible memories. And for a very long time, I didn't feel like I had the right to live. It was a very terrifying feeling to feel that way. He worked in civic disability. I call him by his middle name, Alan, as my father had the name, well, the same name, same first name. Anyway, as I was starting to settle into life, after years of trauma, passions, and bodily abuse for the sake of getting by, he was a generous man. In his work, he was fired for misconduct. A client he had known half his life, half his client's life. He gave him a watch as a gift. He went around showing it off. And he lost his job, which impacted my future. He had an RV at first and all that, and kept trading in different vehicles. But he put me in a very violent caravan park in Hartley. I was stolen from, I was threatened, I was physically harmed, thrown against trailer park doors. A threat that the last thing I ever see would be a dot on my forehead if I ever look at twice again, or whatever. I should actually say that before this time, and before moving to this horrible caravan park for a while, I accidentally ruptured something when I had an anonymous three-way with two other gentlemen. I never really brought up my sexuality in my book, but you can piece it together by reading it. I didn't find it relevant at the time. I would faint to the ground often, have spasm attacks, even fall downstairs in other places. Well, slip into comas, and to this day, I still have that very walking stick. After that, I was very desperate to get out of that caravan park. Claustrophobic during winter. This is when I wrote Winter Passion. It's not one of the free ones on my website. They're still trying to get back up, but still. Well, after that, I started using the internet to try and find ways to get out of my situation. So, I started looking up sites, checking around, calling around. Eventually, I came across someone. And I thought it was just someone I could live with. My foster father was still in the picture at the time. Not that he isn't now, but he avoids me to this day. The reason behind that is because he says I blame him for a lot of things. And I do. He picked us up, and we were in there together. Us in the back seat, him driving the car, and helped get the luggage upstairs. In Waterloo Towers. I and he had no idea this person was a kidnapper and a drugged up control freak. When I walked in, there were people there. There were people doing drugs. There were people doing weird kind of meditations. And there was no electricity, so I ran a cord to get electricity for at least the lounge room. I had to take a cold shower. By one candle in the dark. The first sexual act he performed, while a drug addict stared at me, I'll never forget the look in his eyes, was forced oral. And from a diagonal version, I could see him looking at me, as the kidnapper was forcefully pushing his head down to me. I was treated like an object, and even molested in my sleep. I was rescued by somebody in Bathurst, who was no longer a friend, because he was tired of rescuing me, to be honest. And he's not a very nice man. Well, anyway, that led me to a depressive state in life. I feel like I deserve to be punished, which is where I wrote It's Diving into the Abyss. Yes, well, I actually started seeking out for a while. Disciplinarian lifestyles, consensually, but in a weird way, and not even I can explain it. Eventually I got over it, but that's exactly how I met my ex-fiancé, Larry, in Katoomba. Larry insisted I called him Sir or Master, and he was quite nice in the beginning. But after the first 3 days, he said, "I love you, and should we propose marriage?" I found that very odd, considering how quickly that was. Well, we got quite affectionate, so I gave him a hug, and he said he was off to bed, and he pushed me across the kitchen floor. He lived with a housemate who was 19 at the time, and he kept dragging me around to introduce me to his friends, and I didn't want to be. I just pretty much wanted to stay at home and work. Well, at this point, because of the blood clot illness, which has now been cured recently, and lasted 5 years, I was still in a weakened state. But he used the police as a weapon. Every single time there was a slight argument, and not for the first time. When I told his friend, Andre, about it, about me being, at the time, suspected of being terminal, and losing blood, urinating, ejaculating blood, you name it. Falling down his stairs, spasm attacks again. All he would do was sigh and put a pillow under my head and walk away. But Andre had different plans. He didn't much like me being there. So, when I told him outside that I believe in euthanasia too, he ran to a drawer and grabbed out a bottle of, what was it called again? Oh, let's see, I think I can remember. I'm sure it will come to me. It was a sort of poison, and very lethal. Well, anyway, I tried 3 days to commit suicide as people sat down there. Morphine-based poison, that's it. While Larry and Andre were down there and said nothing. 3 days of trying to take my own life, including trying to swallow an overdose on 100 Panadol. I was in pain, and I was still being tormented. Eventually, Larry sold his house because he couldn't afford to keep it any longer. And Andre went to live somewhere else, still visiting there. I had to stay with someone in Bathurst, in another area. He was violent, controlling, and possessive of me. In the end, after a few months, Laura and I reconciled over the phone. The person who was a control freak actually admitted to being a control freak in front of my unofficial foster father. This is when I moved into his home in Portland, not too far from Lithgow. After the wars had settled, they really didn't. He had me knowing I was very ill, moving heavy furniture constantly, and really had no sense of my feelings. I think he was a very callous person deep down. So, he harmed me in many ways, emotionally using the police as a weapon yet again, bringing them to my attention. And he strangled me while threatening to rip an organ out of me simultaneously. He threw me sideways to the kitchen counter, and then, frontways to the kitchen counter, then sideways to the floor. Strangulation, prior to that, days before, took place on the lawn. In the dead of night, outside the place I was supposed to be living on the property, the granny flat, which now my foster father, inhabits. Let's put it that way. Well, desperate from the living situation there, I made yet another attempt to try and get out. I was offered a place in Sydney. And I packed a bag. A taxi was called. And we're on a train. This person gave me a ring. I put it behind another ring because it didn't fit. When we got there, he disclosed that I was now sexually enslaved. I wrote about a piece in my book, an intermission, after I don't want to be selfish, speaking to my nephew. Well, I wrote this during the kidnapping. For some reason, I was allowed to use my laptop, internet connection, and phone. He was with someone called The Circle, which is also mentioned in my book. There were so many details behind that one, including people who came and went, and I was told to keep my mouth shut. If I left, I was threatened to be brought back and mutilated. And some very disturbing recordings I secretly recorded that the police took away on my phone and laptop and brought back and thought was some kind of sick kind of roleplay, when it was a real deal with an actual kidnapper with a secret society called The Circle. Once I was freed from that nightmare, even a taxi driver heard about it, driving me to the Ibis Hotel. Then I went to another Ibis Hotel, and then back to Darwin for a while. But during this third kidnapping, there was nothing creepier than him running his hands down my body unwillingly, on nothing but a blank white mattress with a small white blanket and no pillow sheets at all. At first, it was stacked up on some rubber thing that was sticking to me. And running his hands down, saying, "I'm glad you're not mutilated in any way." He said creepy things. He did creepy things. He would make me sit on his lap. And even when he felt me pulling away, he would pull me back. He was an external practitioner. One of the reasons I don't trust doctors that much. Except my neighbours. My neighbours are pretty cool. I don't know if they're doctors, but they work at a hospital. They're a couple. After the third kidnapping, it became apparent, even when I reached out to the police multiple times, I reached out to helplines, and I reached out to the media. Eventually, he gave me a key to make it look like it was authentic. When I played the recordings to him, I got scared. I said to him beforehand, what happens if I tell someone about this? If I ever get out of here? He said, I'll deny it. Which he clearly did. He cleverly went into the police station and said he no longer wanted me living there. Unbeknown to the police, I was held against my will. I kept trying to show the police the recordings when I was gone, and he said I was there under trust. They didn't even have time, these incompetent fools, to let me get the recordings to start working. They're not as busy as you think they are. I know, my mother was an auxiliary police officer, and one of her best friends was a full police officer. They're not as busy as you think. They try to pretend to be, but they just want to go home. Collect their paychecks to go home. They don't really care about the citizens. That much I do agree on. Some act like they're behind a supermarket counter while you're waiting for a seat, and others just act like thugs, trying to justify illegal behavior. And I have to tell you, I'm going to get to this soon. The Katoomba Police Station, New South Wales, Blue Mountains, Australia, they are corrupt, a lot of them. But we're going to get to that at the end of this. We're just past halfway done with this interview, so we'll move on to another incident. After all this, I was trapped by police corruption, my emotionally abusive, unofficial foster father, and my violent and emotionally abusive ex-fiance. I went through 2 wards and later a 3rd one. Well, that was because of crisis line. The first 2 were to recover from the traumas of the 3rd kidnapping. So being trapped between all of that, his house was right in front of a quarry. I made a decision to jump over the fence, the barbed wire as well, and I jumped off a cliff in an attempt to kill myself. I couldn't handle it anymore, or the illness. So, it took me almost a year to walk. I had to drag my body across a difficult property just about every night for quite a long time. Later on, I slashed halfway through my arm, almost by accident, and it went all the way down to my muscle. And I was in hospital on my birthday. I insisted on going home, and I did. I went back 2 days later as promised, and I sewed it up. After that, I was moved to Wallarlang. But my foster father had always abandoned me. I was abandoned in a house with no one but my cat companion. There's a reason I called myself the abandoned poet. It was a horrible area, horrible neighborhood, horrible pubs, everything like that. Well, eventually, I ended up in a place called Lithgow. For over a year, I begged to be moved to a pet-friendly place, and my cat companion was given back, taken away, given back, taken away. And nobody even cared at the time that my mother died. Well, after that, I had to face a lot of violent situations which happened. A lot of annoyances from police, again. And there was this one time I went into a music store on Lithgow Street, and you know, prior to that was some of my mother's inheritance after the third kidnapping. Oh, sorry, no, that would be the fifth kidnapping, but I'll get to that. Well, I was like this, but with a silver jacket. I wasn't wearing any shit underneath, but it was because I had a driver slash bodyguard for a while. And he was expensive too. Now this is a little out of order right now, but I think you gauge the gist. Anyway, well, the people there were intensely horrible, and when I went there to complain to the police station in the Lithgow area, they're not corrupt, but they certainly are dicks. Well, I sat down, and when I said that, I'm not sure if he was thinking I meant my appearance, but twice when I said I think he was jealous, he said I doubt that very quickly. Once I said it again, he said I doubt that. And I was just sitting there thinking, this asshole is 10 times less attractive than I am. Overly gelled hair, greasy bronze face. Probably fancies himself. And then he called me delusional. Thanks, dumbass, you've ruined the word delusional for me now. I used to like that word. Well, after all that, and after moving heavy bags around the streets for years, and being forced to do things that I can't, finding ways out of situations, well, a fourth kidnapping arrived. Now, this wasn't any usual kidnapping. This was the kind of kidnapping where he tried to make it a relationship. He was not as old as he looked, almost a little older looking than me. Well, anyway, I do remember his first name, but I don't know his full name. But I'll leave that out there. So when I got off the train station, I was seeking medical attention at the Sydney train station, Central. No one could see, but when I walked around the corner, I was grabbed. And this was only last year. So as you can see, we're getting pretty close to the end of this interview. No, wait, hold on. It was either last year or the year before. Anyway, 4 years in a row. All 5 included. Yes, last year. No, wait, the other one was last year. This was the other year. Alright. Well, anyway. He took me to a place overlooking the Sydney Harbour. And cleaners came in. He had a dog there. Apparently, it wasn't even his place. So, after that, I was molested in a bedroom there. And then he took me, dragging things around, to the Columbian. He apparently had a meeting, and he had a friend guarding me and following me around in broad daylight in public. As I was used to being kidnapped and knew there was no point in resisting, I just like, okay, I know what's happening right now. I found strategies and ways out of it. I was only rescued from 2 out of 5 of them. The rest I did myself. This one I did myself. But before you know more about that, well, he was a very cruel person. He was very misguided. He would rape me multiple times. And, well, yeah. He took me out and forced me to do karaoke introduced me to his friends like I was a partner, and people didn't know that I was being held with him against my will, and I just smiled. When I finally stood up for myself, and I was on a bus ride home during the bushfires, he texted me that he wanted to kill himself. The person who rescued me from him, so there was a little bit of a rescue going on, was the one he made me stay with. Which leads me to the fifth kidnapper. Now, being incredibly ill, I couldn't defend myself. So I was taken to all these places by him, and almost forced to marry him. I couldn't find my way around. And he tortured me with nipple torture every chance he got. Ironically, he's the only kidnapper I've forgiven. I went a little bit light on that one because it's far more graphic and far more brutal and complex than you think. I later on went back and, to the same residence because the person he kept me with, who was in the dark, apparently, I thought I could trust him. It was stressful in Lithgow at the time, and I wanted a holiday. Well, it turns out he deprived me of sleep, food, water, intentionally for 10 days, and I recorded him as well. And he had no nose and no upper lip due to smoking. He was waiting for a prosthetic, apparently. So this is a fifth person to keep me against my will. My unofficial foster father eventually rescued me from the situation. Drove all the way out, hours, from the country to Sydney to rescue me from a Matt Scott kidnapping. Okay. Now, after that, I was still quite tormented. I can't say how I was feeling that much at the time. I didn't even bother showing those recordings to the police. They were shorter, and there were about 7 of them. And it actually is recorded of his admission to envy and his confession to ripping my right nipple in half. Last time I get my nipples pierced. Anyway, moving on. After that, the inheritance did come in, and I was still in Lithgow, a terrible place. Eventually, they moved me. Well, I can barely remember where. A place called Cascade Street in the Blue Mountains, where you'll see some bitch out there acting like she's top dog in a complex. Aboriginal lady. And, well, uses threats to her sons and all that. A person I consider very capable of death. Now, when they placed me there, I was just trying to get people to leave me alone. I'd had enough. I had already experienced almost gone insane with a broken heel a few years prior to this. And I gotta tell you, insanity is quite real. I mean, I was unstable, and nobody gave a damn. I had to come out of it all on my own. This lady's name is Sharon, in Cascade Street. It's a complex. You'll see her sitting on a seat outside. I actually don't care if I do get sued. It's about time the truth came out. She had friends there like a lady named Lee. She got particularly envious when she invited me to come to practice some gymnastics with her, and I did a flip from the tree just on the rings. Then there was Smitty, who strangled me in the open. And Sharon banging at my door constantly, threatening to cave my skull in. And yelling at the top of her lungs to people, emotionally crying. telling lies to police. Even though I stuck up for her and got an apology out of the one who strangled and threw her to the ground before I got there anyway. But that wasn't it. It went on and on and on. One night I was punched to the ground by Lee. Then I was, and this is only recent, and another one from the front. She punched me to the left. Then Smitty from the front came at me and punched me in the face too. Then from a diagonal standpoint, Sharon comes right at me and punches me in the face also. Some teenage kid for some reason was yelling at me. They lied to police. I'm qualified in Certificate 3 in disability work since I was 18. I'm qualified to work with all ages and purely platonic and only into older. 40 years or older. There's somebody planning to come from Portugal to visit me, and his is 44. Now, this disgusted me so much, I just stood up, I looked at them, and I said, I don't believe in violence. And then walked into the unit. Well, Sharon was a drug addict. She had a prison record. I think they all had prison records. And I think most of them were drug addicts. She smoked pot a lot. And I called the police often because I was terrified. It became biblical. They started throwing bricks through a window, threatening me, chasing me, throwing eggs at the door, threatening to kill my cat, companion Alex. Alexis Ava Wilkinson. Alex Alexi for short hair, cross ragdoll, black and white. And I fought so hard to be with her again. So I didn't. Well, after that, there were 2 false arrests and 3 false charges. I was apparently accused of a knife. There was no knife, but even if there were, could you blame me? After being attacked, assaulted, and threatened, I had my head under covers. But no, there was no knife. And there were no witnesses, and I write poems. So I dropped a couple of copies to each of the neighbours in the complex. The first poem they seemed to like, the second one outraged them. And the police, I think, tried to call that evidence. I encourage anyone in the media, friends, family, fans, to get involved in this. This police force is corrupt. And I've suffered enough. I've experienced debilitating pain. I've experienced pain like you'll never believe. I've experienced heartbreak. I've experienced emotion. And my only mission in life was to help people and prevent them from living a life full of abuse and cruelty, corruption, violence. On that day of that false arrest, Sharon was hitting me, beating me with a shovel. I still have a couple of tiny scars on my hand. I think she was trying to take the attention off the fact that she assaulted me. And God, she can lie her head off. Okay, so that's one arrest. The other one, I'm not quite sure. Oh yes, now I am. I asked someone not to leave their trash on my on my curb. And I didn't know it was my trash. I kept paying someone $50, who I'm no longer in contact with. I lost 2 phones, asked my foster father, to take it out, and he just kept jumping everywhere. So they found it appropriate for idiots to keep coming at my door. In his case, he punched my face in. My face was covered in blood. I can't hurt anyone, so I got up. I went around to the side of the car and I kneed it. Listen to me, New South Wales. I will not be paying that fine. You can squeal for your ill-gotten attempt of money. Later on, well, there are 3 charges. 1, the non-existent knife. You go into my kitchen and feel threatened if you like. but I would never threaten anyone with anything. Okay. Now, what was the other one? No, yes, the car. Okay. And here's the third one, which is the most ridiculous of all. I'm Asperger's, you see. I don't like being touched or grabbed. Now, I have been handled by the police and I just went with it, even though I really hated it. I don't like being touched without my permission. I don't like being pulled. You know, only loved ones can touch me without my permission. Right? So, they manhandled me, and there's definitely homophobia and tall popper syndrome. Apparently, the moment I mentioned I was an author, they arrested me. So, when one of the officers at the Katoomba police station, before we started traveling to the Katoomba police station from my place at the time, he said, and this was back in the other place, he said, "Faggot." He muttered it. I heard him. Well, the most ridiculous charge here of all is that he was grabbing me by my hand. And as I said, people with ASD do not like to be touched. I asked him to stop when I was doing my finger and handprints, you know, after my mugshots. Interesting night. And I asked him twice, please stop. So, just like I would say to anyone, like family, please, don't go around grabbing people. They called that assault. No. Go on, I did that to my mother when she was in uniform. That was me saying, don't fucking touch me. If you're going to handle my hand, look, you don't have to rough me up to do it. I fight against abuse, violence, cruelty, corruption, discrimination, sexual slavery, pedophilia, terrorism, and much more, remember? Well, I do intend on having the Katoomba police force exposed. And I certainly do intend on having them charged. And everything from my slate wiped clean. Anyone from the media, I encourage you to take notice, because I do intend on using this very video clip in court. I do intend on winning, and I do intend to have my reputation back. Nobody has ever seen me harm or threaten anyone in my entire life. Not even me. I'm going to finish this with the last of our hour. This is a book, as I showed at the beginning, called The Abandoned Poet. Now, as it was released in 2019, before these events took place, and Green Hill Publishing Portland, Green Hill Publishing Port Adelaide, can actually tell you that this book was released in 2019. My unofficial foster father can say these events didn't happen when my book was being released. This is my biggest evidence of all. One of my proudest written pieces. It's called A World That Shouldn't Exist. And this is how we're going to end our time together. Might be a little bit over an hour, but it's worth it. There's a lot of pain and horror out there, covered up by humankind. All the things we claim to realize, the tricks played upon our mind. The things we don't want to think about, to keep ourselves stable. But I wouldn't mind, with an angry passion, placing all of this on the table. I have figured out a lot of things, but not the world which we're in. I've counted many things inside my head which never should have begun. There are horrible people in this world. I'm not sure you know how many. Believe me when I say this, because I've witnessed more than plenty. What about the KKK, that wants to take away lives just because of pigment? What about the Satan worshippers, whom kill people and animals so sadistic? What about murderers and serial killers? Yeah, I still blame their upbringing. I'd like to think that once upon a time, each were a happy human being. What about rapists and pedophiles? Are they the same in many ways? By the way, I'm going to stop there and say this. Extremely insultingly at that complex in Cascade Street, one of the police officers said, "Stay away from the children." I felt like strangling the fucking bigoted bastard. I'm gay, not a pervert. Intrusion, violation, random, and family violence dysfunction despite what anybody says. What about religion? They say God created all of us, but millions died in his name. We are dealing with living, breathing people. This shouldn't be a game. What about war, terror, blood, and a world that will swallow us whole? Those who survived came back on wheelchairs or on crutches, each another broken soul. What about third world torture, abduction, slavery, both young and old? They think they're selling their slaves, but it's the world that's being sold. The terrorists you see all have different opinions, but we're wetter. We're probably partially to blame. Some countries acted like they're better. Can you tell me just how far each government has to conceal? While families live in poverty, for the sake of others' money. There are many top brasses to reveal. I am not paying either of those fines. Squeal. What about the environment? People just couldn't care less. What about theft and muggers psychologically assessed? I've been robbed a few times the past couple of years. Before I moved from Lithgow, I was robbed about $550 by some young people I was trying to help. Some nitwit so-called professional labels people with many a diagnosis. People put away based on others' opinions is an unacceptable prognosis. People just let others die based on protocol, rules, and regulations. I hope in hell those professionals will suffer and are faced with repercussions. Then there are gangs, mafias, and mob bosses that kill for profit or for fun. I see there's no paradise to look forward to. Through trees, there's no gentle rays of sun. What about bikers and drug pushers that ruin everyone for the sake of business? What about all of the kids and people attacked or hooked, leaving no chance for future wishes? Each monarchy doesn't have the common person's interests at heart. They were out for their damn blue blood stock right from the start. What about the homeless population, as he passed without a second thought? If everyone were raised properly, they wouldn't turn out the way they're taught. The petty fears which disappears are facing the dying or the disabled. The things I ponder, the circumstances I wonder, isolated, attacked, and labelled. What about your counterpart, bruised and bleeding on the floor, in the lounge room, which damages and traumatizes each of your fear-felt offspring? The prison system doesn't work, as they're beaten and raped for minor crimes. Some were desperate to get by, then landed in jail, but the department can't get with the times. What about child abuse, which most ignore? It comes in many a form. Don't give me that look! You know what goes on. In their living hells as they pray to God in a storm. The trusted authorities which victimize the innocent, whom are said to serve and protect. They've ruined countless lives, and most are power crazy. How about showing the people a little respect? The problems in this world should have been solved by now, but where charity money goes is concerning. It rarely all goes to where it's supposed to, as desperate, angry, starvation keeps on burning. What of concentration camps, with numbers down each arm? Rocking from side to side, not knowing where you are, struggling to remain calm. There's a mental state which belated any hope of escape. The bodies belong to them, to the brains from the stems, which should have been recorded on tape. How many times have you been told to take responsibility? It's hypocritical if the world can't do that, and it impacts you and me. Were you ever told that you get yourself into situations based on lack of understanding? Perhaps you trusted others, seeking something, entered with nothing, ended up with the sadistic. But imagine. There are riots on the streets. Have people been pushed to the limit? If those high up could compromise even just a little bit. Discrimination at work, gender, preference, age, or color. These things never should have happened. We should have been there for each other. Lost homes based on everything that could not be controlled. Some live uncomfortably when renting a home unless they do exactly as they're told. What about alcohol and nicotine? Sold on every corner. A countless number hooked. Their lives are destroyed. To me, that's the same as murder. Yeah, they chose to do it, but later wish they didn't. It's the same as being tempted by the devil. I was right all along, and the planet gone wrong when I said the world's playing evil. What about the kidnapped? It's happening right now, as you may live in bliss. The blood and the stain, the body they claim, and the families you know they miss. The rockin', the fear, as good people disappear, and life shouldn't be purely misery. I was yelling at God, that horrible sod, but the bastard took my nurse of me. Pain worse than you could ever imagine. As others are captive, can you picture them at this very moment? No pain, no plan is worth that torment from birth. And when reported, they state, no comment. What a fluorescent light seen in our sights that blind us where we hang. What of the night with that whimper-bound fright, crying out as they sang? In the name of science, many people die. I can see the headlines now, swept under the carpet as we're all passing by. How can someone come up with ideas to make third world torture thicker? No one should ever think this way, inventing torture devices or coming up with ideas of every intensity or cruelty. Tell me, who is sicker? Let me get my head together, as my ideals of a perfect world will be missed. No one wants to change it, and no one will put a stop to it in a world that shouldn't exist. Finn. Now, as I said, I believe this person, Sharon in Cascade Street, to be capable of murder. I'll dedicate the rest of and the remainder of my life to get my entire record cleared from the corruption of the Katoomba police force, and the AVO switched on me to Sharon with a restraining order. I fight for truth. I fight for justice. I fight for you. I am the abandoned poet. Violent people of neighborhoods. Corrupt Katoomba police force. Get ready for a battle, because it's gonna be big. Ladies and gentlemen, my career is gonna progress in quite a few ways once I do some transactions and business calls. I'll just sit back and they'll do all the work. We're going to be arranging some, well, let's just say events. I'll let it be a surprise. Now, I'm not playing games, I'm on the warpath in a very legal sense. This video will be used as evidence. And I know the judge usually sides with the police, but then again, I did grow up in a police family. My character witnesses are also astoundingly awesome, and some of my fans. Well, this has been over, well, 4 minutes past an hour. Looks like we're done. I love you all. I love my friends. I love what's left of my family. And I love my fans. I hope there is action taken soon with my current situations. There's always been a cloud hanging over my head all my life. I've done nothing but stress, worry, and cry about 3 times a day for years. Especially when I'm writing. I hope my friends, family, and fans can support me through this hard time. Yet another hard time. Again I say, I fight for truth. I fight for justice. I fight for you. I am the abandoned poet. I do care. Love you all.